This took place back when I was younger. I was 7 years old at the time, and the year was 2005. It was summertime, and my family and I decided to take a short trip to visit my cousins, aunt, and uncle, who lived a few states away. I remembered that my cousin Matt and I would get together whenever we were in the same city, mainly because our ages were close. We also shared many similar interests, so I was looking forward to hanging out with him as soon as we arrived. We went to this gigantic mall located right next to Matt's home. The place was huge. There was an amusement park in its center. That's where my family and my cousin's family spent the day, and we got those wristbands that let you ride all the available rides. We all made our way around the amusement park, going on various attractions. Our parents stuck close by, while our younger sisters tagged along. I recall that after a bit, Matt and I wandered off a short distance from our parents to try a certain ride. The mall was extremely crowded, and at some moment I lost sight of Matt. I'm not entirely sure what caused it. Maybe I got distracted or it was just too bustling. All I can say is that I tried to locate him but had no luck. I kept walking around thinking I would spot him, and then I realized I was lost. At some stage, as I was wandering around alone, this random guy began tailing me. I'm not sure when I first noticed him, but once I did, I kept moving, hoping to see a familiar face, maybe my parents or my sister. In hindsight, I think I only ended up drifting further away. The man following me wore a black shirt, glasses, and had a bit of a beard. I don't recall anything else about him. Wherever I walked, he stayed a short distance behind me. After maybe 10 minutes of me circling the park, I was too nervous to continue. I decided to leave that section to distance myself from him. I stepped into the large corridors of the mall, not having a clue which direction to pick. There were people everywhere. I headed toward the escalators, took one to the next floor, and saw that the same man was still on my trail. Once upstairs, I aimlessly wandered. I believe I went into a shop or two, then came back out, but I couldn't shake him. I strolled around the second level for quite a while, realized it wasn't working, then made my way back to the escalators. Thankfully, I managed to spot them again. When I reached them, I went back down and returned to the amusement park. I glanced behind me, and sure enough, the man was still there. It was wild how long he had been keeping up with me. Feeling desperate, I picked a random children's ride, the very first one I saw, figuring he wouldn't get on it since it was kid-specific. I scanned my wristband and hopped on, and soon the ride started. As it went around, I kept worrying how I'd locate my family or lose this guy. When the ride ended, I was shocked to see my parents heading toward me. Right after I got off, they asked why I decided to go on that ride alone. I explained that a man had been following me and I was trying to get away. They wanted to know who it was, but when I turned to show them, he was gone. I never spotted him again that whole day or at any time after that. I'm really grateful my parents appeared when they did. I still don't know what that man's plans were. Story 2. This took place when I was a kid and at home by myself. It was during summer break and both my parents were working. I believe I was around 12 years old. I have an older brother, and he was visiting a friend's place that day. Whenever I was on my own, I'd do random things around the house. Often I'd use the computer we kept in the living room to play Minecraft or another game. One early afternoon, I'd been on the computer for a while and felt like getting something to eat. Our kitchen was located at the back of the house, and we lived in a split-level home. I'd also say our neighborhood was pretty typical, somewhat quiet. While standing in the kitchen, I noticed movement outside the window. Initially, I barely caught a glimpse, but it appeared to be someone walking by. I moved to a different window to get a clearer view, and that's when I saw a man heading toward the rear part of the house. He seemed to be wearing a construction vest and had a cap on. It occurred to me that he might be the meter reader. They came to our house every now and then. I immediately felt relieved, though I'd been startled when I first spotted someone in our backyard. He went all the way to the back of our home, near one of the basement windows. I returned to grabbing food in the kitchen. After about 5 minutes of rummaging around the kitchen, I glanced over and realized the man was still there. Typically, they'd leave really quickly, usually only staying a minute at most. I headed back to the living room to continue on the computer, but soon I had an odd feeling that I should check again if the man was gone. Maybe it was just me being paranoid, considering I was 12 and alone. I carefully returned to the window, and sure enough, he was still there. I couldn't believe it. From my angle, higher than where he was standing, I couldn't see precisely what he was doing. He was near the basement window, but that was it. I debated going downstairs to look through that same window, but knew he'd spot me right away if I did. So I moved to try another window on the main floor where I might have a better angle, but I had to be cautious he wouldn't see me. Sadly, that's when I made a mistake. While walking, I accidentally knocked a can off the kitchen counter, and it hit the floor with a loud clang. Suddenly, the man hurried away. He went around the side of the house and I rushed to the front. From there, I saw him calmly strolling down the street until he vanished from sight. He seemed really suspicious to me, and I wondered if he was even a meter reader. Why would he take off like that the moment he heard a noise? Still, I was mostly relieved he'd left. I headed back to the computer and stayed there until my brother and parents came home. By then, I didn't think it was worth mentioning anything about him. I thought he was gone for good. My brothers and my bedrooms were both in the basement, whereas my parents slept upstairs. Since it was summer, we usually stayed up pretty late. On that night, my parents had already gone to bed, and my brother had turned in downstairs to his room. I was still awake, using the computer in the living room. All the lights in the house were off, except for a little lamp close to me. At around 1 a.m., I started feeling tired. I turned off the lamp and went downstairs to go to bed. To get to my room, I had to pass a small living area in the basement. As I was walking by, I noticed something in the window. It was that same man. I could only make out his silhouette, but I was sure who it had to be. Then I heard some sounds at the window, like he was trying to open it. Fear hit me instantly. It was really dark, and I reached for the light switch on the wall, which was luckily within arm's reach. Suddenly, everything lit up so I couldn't see him as well, but I heard noise right outside the window, and then it sounded like he ran off. I did the same, rushing back upstairs to my parents' bedroom. I knocked loudly, yelling for them to wake up. About a minute later, my dad came out, asking what happened. By then, the man was long gone. My dad went outside to check around the whole house. It turned out that the back window the man had been messing with was heavily damaged. It looked like he'd tried to remove it entirely, and was close to succeeding. After that night, we never saw him again. I stayed scared for a while, convinced he might return, so I slept on the couch upstairs where I felt safer. Luckily, he never came back. Story 3. For context, I'm female and used to work at Target over a year ago. My apartment at the time was really close to the store, and overall I enjoyed working there. My favorite part was talking with coworkers and making new friends. Primarily, I worked in the clothing department doing a variety of tasks, and it wasn't too hectic since that section stayed calmer than the grocery side. I'd been at Target for almost 4 months by the point of this story, and I still recall it clearly. Everything began like a normal workday in the clothing area, specifically the women's section, where I was tidying items that were out of place. It was daytime, and the store wasn't too busy. That's when a tall man came up to me. I assumed he was just a customer who might need assistance. I greeted him, asking how I could help. He looked right at me with this kind of eerie grin and then said, "Yes, you can help me by going out with me tonight." I brushed it off with a laugh. I didn't want to go out with him, but I wasn't frightened. I told him I had a boyfriend even though that wasn't true. Personally, I'd found saying that was the easiest way to deflect unwanted advances. The man answered quickly, "No, you don't." I repeated that I did, and asked if he needed help locating something. Then he gave an even weirder response. "Yes, directions to your house." I forced a small laugh, hoping he was joking, but it was definitely bizarre. At that point, I said I had a lot of work to do and wished him a nice day. Then I moved to a different section of the large clothing area, practically hoping to lose him in it. But sure enough, he followed. Once I reached another part and noticed he was still there, I stopped. I wasn't afraid of confrontation, so I said, "Why are you following me? You're making me uncomfortable." He raised his hands in a gesture that said, "My bad." and then walked away to my relief. I'd had a few customers hit on me before, but none were quite as strange as this. I kept on working for a few more hours, and I nearly forgot about the earlier incident until I spotted that same man again. At first, I couldn't believe it. This was about 3 hours after our initial run-in. I was shocked he was still in the store. Maybe he had left and come back, but either way, it was unsettling. What made it worse was that as soon as I noticed him, I saw him glance over at me, then quickly turn away. He was fairly far, almost hidden by a rack of clothes, but he was staring right toward me. I moved a bit to continue working, and he also shifted himself slightly so he could keep me in sight. I sighed, feeling annoyed. I walked off, leaving my current task behind. I headed to another section of the store, far away in groceries, where I didn't actually have any work, but just wanted to escape him. I'd only been there about a minute when I glimpsed him strolling in. As soon as he spotted me, he vanished behind a nearby aisle. That was when I decided to take my break. I had one due anyway, so I radioed my supervisor to say I was going for my break, and I went straight to the front. The break room was just past some doors up there, and I made my way in. While on break, I thought about how blatantly this guy was following me, almost like he believed I couldn't see him. I hoped he would leave once he realized I wasn't on the sales floor anymore. I'll admit, I took a bit longer on my break than usual because I was worried about running into him again. Eventually, I returned and carefully resumed my work in the clothing department, keeping watch for him. Fortunately, I didn't see him anywhere for the remainder of my shift, which was about 2 more hours. I was very happy he seemed to be gone, though I couldn't help but imagine he could be lurking somewhere out of sight. By the time my shift ended, I was fairly sure he wasn't around. I left for home and tried to forget the whole ordeal. I worked a handful of more shifts that week, mainly my usual hours. One evening the following week, I was on a quieter shift, and it was getting late. The large after-work crowd that usually came between 4 and 7 p.m. had already trickled out. I was handling my normal tasks in the clothing department, organizing different areas, when I got a call on my walkie asking for me by name. I responded, telling them I was listening. I didn't recognize the voice on the line, but that wasn't unusual given how many employees there were, plus new hires. A few I knew by voice, but a lot I didn't. The voice asked me to switch to channel 3. That's typically how we'd talk privately about certain tasks. After I switched over, I repeated that I was there. The voice then told me I was needed in receiving to help with something quickly. I acknowledged and started heading that way. Receiving was basically the back room of the store. I wasn't assigned there often, but I'd helped out from time to time. It took a few minutes to walk there, and when I arrived, I exited into the back area. It felt eerily quiet. I assumed someone would be waiting, so I clicked back to channel 3 on my walkie and told them I was in receiving. No answer, but I could hear my own voice echo on another walkie somewhere close. I called out, asking where they were, but no response came. Then I followed the faint echo which led me near a door to the outside. It was open, revealing the night beyond. That's when I saw him, the same man. He emerged from behind some shelving. I was stunned. "So that was you on the walkie, huh?" I asked. Instead of replying, he started walking toward me. I backed away, noticing how much bigger he was compared to me. If he tried anything, I wasn't sure I could stop him. He came close, and when I turned, he grabbed my arm and began pulling me backward. I yelled, but it was doubtful anyone would hear me in that secluded spot. Suddenly, I heard the door to the main store area open, and one of my co-workers, Amy, walked in. I shouted her name, and she asked what was happening. The man let go of me and bolted out the door into the night. I hurried over to Amy and told her the whole story. She explained that she'd overheard someone calling me on the walkie. When she didn't know who was speaking and felt curious, she also tuned in to channel 3. She caught that they wanted me in receiving, and thought it was odd because she'd been back there earlier in the evening and didn't recall any tasks that needed doing. She decided to check for herself, and I'm beyond thankful she did. We ended up calling the police. Sadly, there wasn't much to be done. The guy had used a walkie that matched our frequency, easy enough to buy. I'm just grateful I wasn't seriously hurt. I stayed at Target a few more months, and luckily never encountered him again. Story 4. In 2012, on the final day of my sophomore year of high school, a girl from my gym class sent me a friend request. Let's call her Lauren. She was a year younger. We had never spoken, had no mutual friends, and I hadn't even known her name prior to this request. After checking her profile, I saw she was related to someone in my grade, and since we went to the same school, I accepted her. All year in our gym class, my group of friends and I never dressed out or took part. We mostly stayed on the sidelines near the locker room. Lauren and her group did dress out, but usually didn't participate either. They'd hang out on the other side of the gym. The reason I remembered Lauren is that I sometimes caught her looking in my direction. I wasn't among the popular crowd. I was a bit tomboyish, slightly emo, so I found it weird she seemed to notice me. But I told myself maybe she was just staring toward my part of the gym without really focusing on me personally. Let me backtrack a bit. At the time, I secretly owned an iPod Touch and used a text-free app because my dad was very strict. He wouldn't allow me to have a phone and hadn't bought the iPod either. I purchased it from a friend for about $100 in 9th grade. I used text-free to stay in touch with friends, but never once posted that number on Facebook. My dad was always saying he had ways of checking what I did online, even without an account, so I believed him. My settings were fully private, and I watched everything I put up. Then, a few days into summer break, I started receiving texts from a number with an unfamiliar area code. I had to Google it, and it turned out to be from another state. I lived in Florida, so it felt off. Initially, I wondered if one of my friends was playing a joke on me. The person texting called themselves Frank. They knew my name, knew where I went to school, my age, everything. This only made me more certain it was someone I knew, especially when I thought about my favorite movie, Donnie Darko, which features a character in a bunny suit named Frank. I kept guessing which friend it might be, but each time they said no. Soon the texts took a disturbing turn, describing how they'd been following me for a year, seeing me at the grocery store with my dad, at the beach with friends, and even detailing the swimsuit I'd worn. That terrified me because I never posted any beach pictures anywhere. No tags, no albums, nothing. Frank proceeded to talk about plans to abduct me, describing horrifying, twisted things they wanted to do. I considered ignoring them, but they wouldn't stop. Before I could block the number, I saw a Facebook post while scrolling. "Whoever is texting me from blank number, please stop, I'm really scared." My heart froze. I recognized the area code and double-checked my iPod. It was the same exact number. When I went back to see who wrote the post, it was Lauren, the girl from gym, the one I barely knew with no friends in common. I messaged her, telling her I was getting these creepy texts from the same number. I asked who the person claimed to be, and she confirmed they said Frank. She mentioned she'd received letters in her mailbox and showed me pictures of them. They were so alarming that I genuinely feared we were dealing with a dangerous stalker. This individual knew where she lived, after all. As we exchanged messages over the next few days, we became friends, bonded by fear. After a couple of weeks, still receiving these texts, still talking daily, she told me a white car was parked at the end of her driveway and had been there before. She added her mom would be out of town for work that day, leaving her alone. Worried for her safety, I invited her over to my place until her mom got back that evening. Up to that moment, Frank had no clue where I lived. I wanted to keep it that way, so I asked Frank to describe my house, and they said a white house with blue shutters. I replied something like, "Wow, how'd you know?" hoping to throw him off. My home was actually brick with brown shutters, but I didn't want him to figure that out.